Just as the previously tested SPX by Spleene, the QX is also a 4-strut kite. He is equipped with a 4-point bridle with 3 pulleys. The steering lines are directly connected to the tip, and there are 2 different ways to adjust the bar pressure and turning speed. These are however not labeled. The outer position reduces the bar pressure and increases the turning speed. Line deflector can only be found at the end of the front tube. For ventilation, we have a large inlet and outlet valve in the middle of the kite. The front tube is closed with a welted seam, doubled from the inside and sewn, and additionally reinforced with a extra webbing. For the QX, a double ripstop material was used as canopy. The tip ends are reinforced with a narrow Dacron stripe. The trailing edge is provided throughout with a cloth doubling, and additionally supported with 3 slats, so that the trailing edge does not flutter at high airspeed. The struts are each attached to the sailcloth with a single seam and doubled from the inside. Possible impact and chafe points are reinforced with a Cordura material. And the transition from the canopy to the front tube is decorated with a narrow cloth. Already on the first meters it becomes clear, this is really a very powerful kite, due to the early airflow of the canopy and a really very high and consistent overall draft. On the upwind course he pulls far to windward and thus also allows a simple and consistent run-up. Corrections in the wind window are not necessary. All in all, we have low bar forces as far as holding and steering forces are concerned. However, the overall steerability of the kite could be slightly better. Here is the whole bar feeling turns out to be fairly soft. As mentioned, here we have a very high basic draft. However, it is sometimes difficult to get rid of it, there is more wind. Its overall rotational speed is in the middle range. And it is striking that it is a bit difficult to maintain the flow here, at the exit of the curve, especially at the outer edge of the wind window. Otherwise, the airflow to the canopy is very even and neat. Which means that one can also speak of high-profile stability in the entire wind range. With the depower, you would wish for an overall slightly longer depower, so that you could get rid of the through force a bit easier, here. The included safety system of Spleene, the so-called chicken loop, has a release force of 12 kilos and a load of 120 kilograms. There was a pressure-free crash on a single front-line safety. As already mentioned in the SPX test, Spleene will soon deliver a new bar, so here, this bar has not been given a separate test just now. So here we only consider the relaunchability of the QX. A pull and holding a steering line is enough to steer the kite without any problems to the lateral wind window edge to cleanly and pressureless take off there. The Spleene QX has a very high level of performance with regards to the hoop jumps. This is thanks to the really enormous and consistent power of the kite. It does not require any really great technique when jumping. It is also easy to perform considerable jumps, over the whole spectrum, through tightening of the bar, and that over a really big wind range. Only, as just said, in order to be able to get the maximum out, you first have to get used to the reaction of the kite a little bit, with regard to its soft bar feeling. Once you have passed this manageable phase, you can enjoy an incredibly beautiful hang time. We are in the field of the best 3-strut Freeridekites and also the really good 5-strut high-performance Freeridekites. For the friends of old school tricks, there is a lot of time. Of course, with unhooked jumps, he does not lack a considerable amount of power, which is difficult to use. In proportion, the driver should have a bit higher weight, if he also wants to use this point. Otherwise, of course, it is also clear that there is no slack here. The kite consistently just pulls on throughout the maneuver and can thus very difficult to control. So you always need a little longer braking distance for each trick. When changing from high rotational speed and uniform flow, the QX has a little bit of difficulty. After the jump, when it turns in smoothly, it produces a small hole in the flow, which really makes the control moment more difficult. In the approach of the kite loop, the kite turns very fast. However, he then begins to decelerate quickly, which reminds one more of a light stalling, which makes the control in this area much more difficult. In this regard, it is important to achieve the optimum height as a start, in order to then perform the kite loop, and to pull through the whole thing consistently. The whole thing is not necessarily something for the beginner in the kite loop area.
This is Anjuna Deep.
The manageability of the kite when foiling, especially with very little wind and lowest line tension, is something one needs to get used to a little bit. And of course, this slight flow hole from the lower wind window area, if you steer it up again. This requires some experience in the field. It is really important to always power and depower at the right time so that contact with the kite is not lost. Otherwise you enjoy of course the uniform propulsion of this kite. The standing of the kite in the wind window is actually also pleasant and optimal. Only with gusty wind conditions in the inland area is there a lack of depowerability. In places with a steady wind by the sea and in a beautiful sea breeze, the whole thing is completely unproblematic. Thus, the Spleene QX can consistently convince with really high performance in the freeride range, and excellent jumping characteristics for everyone. There is no need for any higher driving skills. The kite convinces with a high basic draft and an even flow and a great lift and a really great hang time. In order to be able to convince even more in the top areas of kite loops, unhooked jumps or foiling, it would require a better tactility on the bar, and a slightly more modern bar feeling overall. Here, the whole kite and the whole concept appears a little bit old school, whereby the versatility and generally suffers a little. Those who say for themselves very clearly, I want a kite that gives me a maximum early planing, with a decent jumping ability, is really well served with the QX. He gets a solid processed glider. Okay, the whole thing could still be a bit straighter and cleaner here and there, but in principle, everything looks quite decent. The whole concept is very harmonious in itself. But to be on the top league of the Freeridekites in the 3-strut segment or in the 5-strut freeride high-performance range, in order to play on top league, it would take a small tick more homogeneity.
Yeah.